Have you ever been called crazy, just because you dared to say what no one else would? Throughout history, there have been people who were laughed at, isolated, fired, even executed. But as time passed, and the truth came to light, the world had no choice but to say, they were right. This is the top 10 people who were once seen as insane, but later vindicated by history, even celebrated as heroes who changed the world. Number 10. John Yudkin, the man who warned the world about sugar today. We all know that eating too much sugar can lead to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. But what if I told you that over 50 years ago, one man tried to sound the alarm, and the world silenced him? Let's talk about John Yudkin, a pioneer scientist whose warnings were buried until it was nearly too late. Yudkin was born in 1910 in England. He became a renowned professor of nutrition at the University of London, and later founded and led the Department of Nutrition at Queen Elizabeth College. Throughout his career, he focused on the link between diet and disease, particularly obesity, diabetes, and heart conditions. In the 1950s and 60s, the mainstream medical community believed fat was the main culprit behind heart disease. But Yudkin's research and epidemiological data told a different story. He believed the real enemy was sugar, not fat. In 1972, he published his groundbreaking book, Pure, White and Deadly. In it, Yudkin argued that sugar significantly increases the risk of obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. It contributes to tooth decay and other metabolic disorders. Society was consuming more sugar than ever, without realizing its long-term dangers. He boldly stated, if only we could cut sugar consumption by half, we'd see a dramatic drop in heart disease. But when you speak an inconvenient truth that threatens billion-dollar industries, you face a storm. And that's exactly what happened to John Yudkin. Attacked by the food industry, the sugar industry, one of the most powerful forces at the time, came at him hard. Big food corporations and sponsored scientists smeared Yudkin's name, branding his work as junk science and conspiracy theories. Launched aggressive campaigns pushing low-fat products, packed with hidden sugars. Manipulated public opinion to distract from sugar's dangers. As a result, low-fat foods flooded the market, unknowingly fueling a global obesity epidemic. It took more than 40 years for science to catch up and clear Yudkin's name. Redemption. Decades later, studies from Harvard, WHO, and other major institutions eventually confirmed sugar is a key driver of many chronic diseases. Even modern experts like Dr. Robert Lustig openly admitted, John Yudkin was right. We didn't listen, and we paid the price. John Yudkin was a man who refused to stay silent in the face of money and power. He was forgotten during his lifetime, but history finally honored his courage. So today, if you're aware of how dangerous sugar can be, remember, it started with one man who had the guts to stand alone. Honor those who speak the truth, even when the world calls them crazy. Number 9. Dr. Bennet Omalu, the man who forced the NFL to change forever in the world of American football, where power and collision are the very soul of the game. One man dared to speak a dangerous truth. We're slowly killing the very heroes we cheer for. That man was Dr. Bennet Omalu. Born in war-torn Nigeria in 1968, Omalu was a child prodigy, entering medical school at just 15 years old. After finishing his training and research in the US, he became a renowned forensic pathologist and neuropathologist, specializing in investigating mysterious deaths. A discovery that shook the sports world. CTE in 2002. During an autopsy of Mike Webster, a beloved NFL legend from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Dr. Omalu found something alarming. Webster's brain showed signs of severe damage, similar to Alzheimer's disease, even though he was only 50 years old. Omalu discovered the buildup of tau proteins, which cause neurodegeneration, and named the condition CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. For the first time in medical history, there was scientific proof that repeated head trauma from contact sports could cause long-term, irreversible brain damage. The NFL's response? Denial and discredit. When Dr. Omalu published his findings in a medical journal in 2005, the NFL quickly went on the attack. They demanded he retract the paper, accused him of junk science, mocked him as an outsider who didn't understand football. They even set up a so-called mild traumatic brain injury committee, but its real purpose was to downplay the seriousness of concussions. But Omalu refused to back down. He kept digging. He examined more former NFL players who had died young: Terry Long, Andre Waters, Justin Sturzelchik. They all showed the same signs of CTE. The truth was no longer just a theory, it was undeniable. The pressure built, and the dam finally broke. Thousands of retired players began suing the NFL. Investigative journalists exposed the league's decades-long cover-up. In 2009, under pressure from the U.S. Congress, the NFL finally admitted, head injuries in football are directly linked to CTE. And the game changed forever. Stricter concussion protocols were introduced. Sideline medical checks became mandatory. Player safety took center stage. Dr. Bennet Omalu didn't just save future athletes, he left behind a legacy. He proved that even one man, armed with truth and courage, can take on $1 billion empire and force it to its knees. And that is why he earns a rightful place on this list of people once labeled crazy, only to be proven right by history. Number 8. Ignaz Semmelweis, the man who taught the world to wash its hands. Imagine this. You're a doctor. You discover a simple, life-saving practice, washing hands with chlorine, and it dramatically reduces deaths. But instead of praise, the world mocks you, isolates you, and calls you insane. That's the heartbreaking story of Ignaz Semmelweis. Born in 1818 in Budapest, Hungary, Semmelweis studied medicine at top universities like Vienna and Pest. In 1844, after earning his doctorate, he became an assistant at the Vienna General Hospital's maternity clinic, a place plagued by shockingly high maternal death rates. Then came the disturbing numbers. There were 2 maternity wards at the hospital, one staffed by male doctors and medical students, the other by female midwives. And the numbers were terrifying. The doctor-staffed ward had 5 times the mortality rate due to postpartum infections. Semmelweis was puzzled. He tried changing birthing positions. He had the hospital stop ringing death bells. Nothing worked. Then, a tragic clue surfaced. A fellow doctor died from an infection after cutting his hand during an autopsy. And that's when it hit Semmelweis. Doctors were carrying deadly particles from corpses into the delivery rooms, on their unwashed hands. A simple solution, met with disbelief. Semmelweis ordered every doctor and medical student to wash their hands with a chlorine solution before touching patients. The results were astonishing. Maternal deaths dropped from 18% to just 1%. He had uncovered one of the most important discoveries in medical history. But instead of celebration, he faced fury. Doctors felt insulted. They didn't want to believe that they, the very people meant to save lives, were causing deaths. Semmelweis was ridiculed and labeled the madman with a blame complex. His life unraveled. He lost his position. His warnings were dismissed. No other hospital would take him seriously. Depressed and broken, he was committed to a mental asylum. In 1865, at just 47, Ignaz Semmelweis died alone, from a bacterial infection, the very thing he tried so hard to prevent in others. But time has a way of revealing the truth. Nearly 2 decades after his death, as microbiology advanced, scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister proved that germs were real, and that antiseptic practices saved lives. Semmelweis was finally recognized as the father of antiseptic procedures, the savior of mothers. Today, every time a doctor scrubs in before surgery, every time you wash your hands at a hospital sink, you're honoring the man the world once called crazy, but who was, in fact, decades ahead of his time. Ignaz Semmelweis didn't just change medicine. He saved millions of lives, and proved that even in the face of mockery, truth always finds its way. Number 7. Harry Markopolos, the man who warned about the financial scam of the century, but no one listened. What would you do if you uncovered the largest financial fraud in history? For Harry Markopolos, the answer was simple. Speak up, even if nobody listened. Harry was a financial analyst based in Boston when he first became suspicious of Bernie Madoff in 1999. As he examined Madoff's investment returns, one thing stood out: the numbers were too perfect. Month after month, they showed smooth, consistent profits, completely unnatural in the chaotic world of investing. It didn't take long for Harry to conclude. This had to be a Ponzi scheme. Over the next several years, Markopolos submitted detailed reports to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Not once, not twice, but 5 times. Each report contained extensive data, charts, and mathematical proof that something was very wrong. But the SEC didn't investigate. They dismissed him, ignored the warnings, and let Madoff continue. Markopolos became increasingly fearful, not just for investors, but for his own safety. He believed powerful people were protecting Madoff, and that exposing the truth could cost him his life. Then, in 2008, it all came crashing down. As the US financial system unraveled, Bernie Madoff's empire collapsed, his own sons turned him in, and he confessed to orchestrating a fraud worth over $65 billion. It was the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Markopolos was finally vindicated, but not relieved. He said, if the SEC had listened back then, thousands of families wouldn't have lost everything. The tragedy wasn't just the scam, it was that the truth was available all along. And the people in power refused to see it. Harry Markopolos showed the world that sometimes, doing the right thing means standing alone, and yelling into the wind until someone finally hears you. Number 6. Alfred Wegener, the scientist who was laughed at for saying continents move. Have you ever had an idea that made total sense, but everyone else thought you were crazy? That's exactly what happened to Alfred Wegener. In the early 1900s, Wegener, a German meteorologist and geophysicist, noticed something strange. The coastlines of continents like South America and Africa seemed to fit together. It was like they were pieces of a giant puzzle. Wegener asked a bold question. What if the continents used to be connected, and then drifted apart over time? He called this theory continental drift, and proposed that all landmasses were once part of a supercontinent named Pangaea. He even found evidence. Similar rock formations across oceans, identical fossils on different continents, traces of glaciers where they shouldn't exist, it all lined up. But there was one problem. He couldn't explain how it happened. There was no known force that could move continents. Because of that, the scientific community rejected him. They mocked the idea, called it junk science, said Wegener was out of his depth and didn't understand geology. He spent the rest of his life trying to prove it, and died in 1930. Still considered wrong by most of his peers. But then, science caught up. In the 1960s, decades after Wegener's death, researchers discovered something amazing: tectonic plates. They proved that the Earth's outer shell is broken into massive plates that move slowly across the surface. Exactly what Wegener had predicted, just without the tools to explain. Suddenly, continental drift became part of accepted science. His theory became the foundation for what we now call plate tectonics, one of the most important discoveries in Earth science. Alfred Wegener was no longer crazy. He was ahead of his time. Sometimes, the truth just needs time to catch up. Wegener taught us that being right too early is the same as being wrong, until the world is finally ready to listen. Number 5. Gene Seberg, Hollywood star Bai Qian-luc Den Chan Vui. Behind every dazzling Hollywood smile, sometimes lies a tragedy buried deep in silence. Gene Seberg was more than just a movie star. In the 1960s, she was hailed as a beauty icon, a rising star with talent and grace. But outside the spotlight, she was also deeply committed to social justice, especially supporting the Black Panther Party and their community efforts like free school breakfast programs. And that's when everything began to spiral. FBI's smear campaign, when the government goes after you under the covert operation known as COINTELPRO. The FBI targeted Gene Seberg for her activism. Their method? Pure character assassination. They leaked false information to the press, claiming she was pregnant by a member of the Black Panthers, a complete fabrication. The media ate it up. Headlines exploded. The emotional stress was unbearable. Gene gave birth prematurely, and the baby tragically died. She was devastated, physically, emotionally, spiritually. No one came to her defense. She was labeled unstable, paranoid, crazy. The truth comes too late. In 1979, Gene Seberg was found dead in her car in Paris. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, but many still question the circumstances. After her death, declassified FBI documents confirmed everything. Yes, they had surveilled her. Yes, they had planted lies in the media. Yes, They targeted her simply for supporting civil rights. What happened to Jean wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a chilling reminder of what happens when power sees truth as a threat. To me, Jean Seberg's story is more than just Hollywood sadness. It's a brutal example of how even the brightest voices can be crushed when they dare to care too loudly, too openly, and in the wrong direction. She stood for something. She stood with people, and for that, she paid the ultimate price. Let's never forget, sometimes, being on the right side of history means being left alone in your time. Number 4. Roger Boisjoly, the man who tried to stop the Challenger disaster. Sometimes a single voice tries to stop a tragedy, but no one listens. In January 1986, Roger Boisjoly, an aerospace engineer working for Morton Thiokol, the contractor responsible for the Challenger's rocket boosters, sounded the alarm. He warned that freezing temperatures could compromise the O-ring seals, a critical component meant to prevent fuel leakage during launch. If they failed, it could mean catastrophe. Ignored until it was too late, Boisjoly and his team urged NASA to delay the launch. But under immense pressure to stay on schedule, NASA pressed forward. On the morning of January 28, 1986, with temperatures near freezing, the Challenger lifted off. Just 73 seconds later, it exploded on live television, shocking the nation and the world. All 7 astronauts aboard, including teacher Krista McAuliffe, were lost. What Roger feared had happened. Courage in the face of silence after the tragedy. Boisjoly came forward and testified before Congress, exposing the internal debates, pressure, and warnings that had been ignored. He faced backlash, isolation, but he never backed down. His testimony helped launch sweeping reforms in NASA's safety culture and decision-making process. He wasn't just an engineer. He became a symbol of ethical responsibility in science and technology. As you see, Roger Boisjoly stood alone, not for fame, not for fortune, but because he knew lives were at risk. In a world that often prioritizes deadlines over diligence, his story is a powerful reminder. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. But history remembers those who try, even when the system won't listen. To this day, when we talk about Challenger, we must also talk about the man who tried to stop it. Roger Boisjoly, a voice of reason lost in the noise. Number 3. Clair Patterson, the man who took on big oil, and won What If I Told You the Air We Breathe, the food we eat, even the toys our kids play with, were once silently poisoned? And one man fought back, completely alone. That man was Dr. Clair Patterson. The mission: date the Earth in the 1940s. Patterson, a geochemist from Iowa, set out to answer one of the biggest scientific mysteries of all time. How old is the Earth? To find the answer, he used radiometric dating, measuring the lead content in ancient meteorites. After years of painstaking research, in 1956, Patterson made a groundbreaking announcement. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, a number still accepted today. But in the process, he discovered something far more dangerous: the dark secret of lead while sampling the environment. Patterson realized something terrifying. Modern humans had hundreds of times more lead in their blood than ancient populations. Why? The answer: tetraethyl lead, a toxic additive being pumped into gasoline, sprayed on crops, and used in household products. Patterson sounded the alarm. Lead isn't just dangerous. It's everywhere, and we're being poisoned by it. Big oil versus one scientist. What happened next? The lead and oil industries launched a smear campaign. They discredited Patterson's work, blocked his funding, and excluded him from government research panels, even though he was the world's leading expert. But Patterson refused to be silenced. He built his own ultra-clean labs, and proved again and again that lead was a public health disaster. Victory and redemption in 1970. His research finally helped influence the passage of the U.S. Clean Air Act. By the mid-1980s, leaded gasoline was being phased out worldwide. The result? Lead levels in children's blood dropped dramatically. IQ scores rose. Millions of lives were saved. As you see, Clair Patterson didn't just date the Earth. He changed the course of human health, because he had the courage to speak truth to power. At a time when everyone said, "Don't rock the boat," he said, "Not on my watch." His story proves that science, when guided by conscience, can protect generations, even when the world fights back. Clair Patterson, the man who cleaned the skies. One molecule at a time. Number 2. Jon Snow, the man who stopped a killer with a map in the 1850s. London was dying. Thousands were dropping like flies from a mysterious disease. The doctors blamed bad air. The government was clueless. But one man had the courage to say, "What if it's the water?" That man was Jon Snow, not the one from Game of Thrones, but the man who changed public health forever. The mystery of cholera at the time. Cholera was ripping through London. It caused violent diarrhea, dehydration, and often death within hours. The medical consensus? Cholera was caused by miasma, foul-smelling air. But Snow didn't buy it. He noticed something strange. Entire neighborhoods were untouched, while others, even the rich, were falling sick. He had a radical hypothesis. Cholera was being spread through contaminated drinking water. The ghost map then came: the 1854 Broad Street outbreak, one of the worst in history. Snow sprang into action, armed with a notebook, a pencil, and a map. He documented every cholera death in Soho, London. The result? All the cases clustered around a single water pump, the Broad Street pump. Snow took his findings to the local authorities and begged them to remove the pump handle. They did, and within days, the outbreak vanished. From laughed at to legend, you'd think they'd praise him. Right? Wrong. The medical establishment ridiculed him. They called him a crank, a nuisance, a plumber with theories. It took years after his death for the world to catch up. Only with the rise of germ theory and modern microbiology did his work get the credit it deserved. The father of epidemiology today. Jon Snow is considered the father of modern epidemiology. His methods, mapping, data collection, pattern recognition, are used in every major disease outbreak, from Ebola to COVID-19. And it all started with a single pump handle. As you see, what I admire most about Jon Snow wasn't just his genius, it was his humility. While others made guesses, he looked for truth in data. While others blamed the poor, he studied patterns without judgment. He didn't wait for permission to ask questions that made people uncomfortable. He followed the evidence and saved lives with logic and compassion. So next time you see a health map or a city official closing down contaminated water lines, just remember, it all started with one man and one broken pump. Number 1. Martha Mitchell, the woman who was labeled crazy, but toppled a regime. Imagine if every time you spoke the truth, you were called crazy. Maybe you'd pause and really listen. This isn't a Hollywood movie plot. It's a true story about a woman who dared to challenge the White House and was silenced in the most brutal way possible. Martha Mitchell was the wife of John Mitchell, the U.S. Attorney General during President Nixon's administration. In the turbulent 1970s, Martha was known for being outspoken, smart, and simply unwilling to keep quiet. She frequently called the press to dish on political happenings, a move that the White House found absolutely intolerable. In 1972, when a break-in occurred at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate complex, Martha suspected something was terribly wrong. She knew one of the burglars was connected to Nixon's re-election campaign, and she wasn't afraid to tell the media. But before she could reveal any more, her phone was abruptly cut off, and Martha was effectively silenced. She later recounted how she was confined in a hotel, heavily guarded, and even injected with sedatives to keep her from speaking. Yet nobody believed her. The press labeled her crazy, and the White House claimed she was mentally unstable. Even her own husband, John Mitchell, refused to stand by her. Then the truth came out. One of the Watergate burglars eventually admitted that Martha Mitchell had been right all along. The scandal exploded into the national spotlight. Nixon resigned. John Mitchell ended up in prison, and the world finally began to recognize the truth. Today, psychologists refer to this as the Martha Mitchell effect, when someone's accurate claims are dismissed as delusions because the truth is too uncomfortable to accept. I think you also believe that if Martha Mitchell were alive in today's social media era, she'd be a powerful icon of women's empowerment. She wasn't the polished, picture-perfect political spouse people expected. She was raw, real, and unafraid to speak truth to power, even at the highest cost. When I think about those who were once labeled crazy for speaking out, Martha Mitchell is the first name that comes to mind. Her courage reminds us that sometimes the truth hurts, and the world isn't always ready to listen until it's too late. They called them crazy. They laughed, ignored, and shut them down. But in the end, they were right. And they changed the world. You don't need to be perfect. You just need the guts to stand up for what's true, even if you stand alone. If this hit home, like the video, share it, and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching. More stories coming soon.